So, Patrick, you're the film editor on Green Book. Um, you've worked with Peter Farrelly before on movie 43.
Hmm.
Uh, so you've got a little bit of a history there. This is sort of a very different kind of movie than we're used to from him. Can you talk just a bit about, I guess, when he told you he was going to do this, what your expectations were like?
Well, I'd worked on yeah, movie 43, which was entirely a different sort of film, and also I did a pilot for him too that never really saw the light of day called Cuckoo. It was a remake
Okay.
of an English comedy series. So when I found this was happening and I read the script, I was like, wow, this is like really good, and this is such a departure for Pete. And so I immediately called him and said, hey, can I get on this? Or do you have anybody? Are you do you have any editors yet? So thankfully he hired me, and we started down that route. And so the collaboration was at first was kind of nice because he gave me my space to kind of do what I wanted to do, and then he would come in on weekends while they were shooting, and we'd work on some stuff, and then we just continued to shape it along the way.
It's a bit of a departure for you as well. I mean, you're mostly known for your work in comedies. There is a lot of comedy in this film, but it's balanced out with some real dramatic elements. So, can you talk just a bit about finding that balance between the comedy and the seriousness of the subject matter?
Yeah, that was probably the biggest trick of the movie was the balance of the comedy and the drama. And I think um, always in my mind was, is it real? Does it ring true? Um, does this sound like a joke? If it sounds like a joke, that's not the right tone for this. So really it was about trying to keep everything real. And these real people existed. I mean, I talked, the writer was the son of the real Tony Vallelonga. So I could talk to him about his father. I had a lot of resources to know about these people. So I wanted to make sure I was doing them right, you know.
Right. Well, talk a little bit about, I guess, what you learned from the writer, who, as you mentioned, is the son of Viggo Mortensen's character,
Yeah.
and so I get had a lot of insight into the real story of this.
He still has all the letters, which I thought was really cool. I would love to read them someday. In fact, he said in one of the letters, he told his wife, "Hey, keep these letters. I want to read them when I get back home." So he was a funny guy, um, and so you know, he also had tapes. He had audio tapes of his father telling these stories. So there was a lot to go off of as far as the details and the stuff that happened in the movie. It's it for the most part is true. There's not a lot of playing with that sort of reality. It really, these things really happened to them. The YMCA really happened. The letters really happened. Um, the show, turning the show down, happened. So a lot of this stuff really happened, and so that was really important to kind of keep to the truth of it.
Right. So the film, I mean, it starts off very much as Vigo's story, but then, I mean, I don't know the exact minute count, but
Yeah.
about a good 15, 20 minutes or so into the film, it shifts and becomes a two-hander with Vigo and Mahershala Ali's character of Don Shirley. Can you talk just a bit about, I guess, balancing their narrative arcs, and because it is such a two-hander for them?
Yeah, I mean, it is ultimately it's Tony Lip's story because it starts with him and it's from his mouth, but also, like, Nick also, he talked to the Shirley family. He talked to Don Shirley before he died as well, so he got all the information. But Mahershala added so much to it. So every time Mahershala was on screen, it was magnetic, and having the two of them together on screen was wonderful interplay. So whenever I could keep them together on screen, like for instance, the car sequences were perfect because you've got a driver and the passenger, and they're both facing forward, and the camera's on them. If you don't have to cut, if you can just let that interaction happen, there's so much beauty in that. So a lot of times you'll sit in the car and you'll see this action, in one shot, and the DP and his crew were amazing. The focus it was in, and so it was always I could always use almost any take I wanted to, which was a pleasure.
Talk a little bit more about those car scenes because they really are the heart of the film, and I mean, it's the sort of thing that could, if it drags on too long, could feel pretty
Yeah.
static. But I mean, there's such a great interaction between the two of them, so I mean, you don't really notice the time going by. Can you just talk a bit about finding the right sort of, I guess, the right sort of length for those kinds of for those scenes?
Those the car scenes, some of them were trimmed down a bit. When things got too much, we tried to figure out ways to tell the story without certain details. Certain details we didn't need. So, for instance, in one of the car scenes, there was talk about JFK, and we decided, well, we don't really need that. We find out later about the connection. So don't tip it now. Let's just get rid of that dialogue, shorten that scene down, and then you'll find out about that later, and it'll be more interesting to find out about it later. Things like that kind of happened along the way, and it was always kind of what feels right, what feels good, and we would show it to people a lot too. So halfway through the director's cut, we had a small screening, about 50 people, and it was long, and we showed it to kind of get feedback, see what was working, what wasn't working, and so that was always helpful. Pete, coming from comedy, he knows about how important that is. When you're working on a comedy and you think, oh, this is funny, you don't necessarily know it's funny until you show it to an audience, because they may not laugh at that joke. One audience might laugh at it, another audience might not. So it helps to get things in front of people to kind of see if we're on the right track, or if we're taking too long with something, or if we're over-explaining something.
Going off of that, I mean, it is a very funny movie, and you talked a little bit about trying to balance the comedy with the drama. Was there something that made you and Peter and everybody else laugh out loud, but you just had to lose it because it hurt the sort of dramatic crux of a scene or a moment?
Gosh, there was something. What was it? There's a bunch of stuff that is really funny, because Pete would let Vigo and Mahershala just try stuff, and so they would come up with things in the moment, and we would laugh at it, and then I'd put it in, and then we'd look at it and go, oh, that's a little too jokey. That's not going to work. But there were quite a few of those, because there was a lot of stuff comedy-wise that kind of hit the cutting room floor, because we didn't want to, again, we wanted to stay true, and we didn't want to overload it with jokes, because that's not what it's about, and they need to come naturally from the scene. So I'd have to think about that. I can't remember the exact joke, but there were quite a few that were like, I wish I could put that in, but that's not going to work. Yeah.
Well, I guess was there also like a because I mean it's a pretty long movie too. It's about 2 hours and 10 minutes, so I mean it's just right about at that length, at the appropriate length. Was there something that a scene or a series of scenes that you guys had to lose in order to get the right pacing?
Well, here's one. We have the Kentucky Fried Chicken scene in the car, and then we go to the plantation, right? And they said we had our kitchen staff cook up something very special for you. They reveal is fried chicken. That scene went on about 5 minutes longer, and that was gone. So what happened in that scene after that is, after they start eating, the part that was removed was everyone's eating with a knife and a fork, and Tony tries to, but then picks it up with his hands and convinces everyone else to pick up the chicken with their hands. And so all of a sudden, everybody's eating fried chicken with their hands. It was funny, but it wasn't quite as funny as just the reveal of the chicken. And we have 5 minutes here. We're like, this is a deadly 5 minutes that we could just be moving on to the next thing. And so there were, in the movie itself, most of the cutting were chunks of scenes or parts of scenes.
I guess we'll have to wait for the Blu-ray to see that one. I'm glad you mentioned the food, because
Pete's son was in that scene too. That was even harder for him to cut, because his son actually was in the scene as an extra. So it was one extra step of like, I don't want to do this to you, son, but I got to cut that scene.
I'm glad you mentioned the food also, because one of my favorite things about the movie is Vigo's appetite. So
he was going for it every take. I tell you, if you watch the takes, not one take did he not go for it. He was like fully eating every single time, and it was amazing. I kind of, while I was there in New Orleans, I kind of took after him. I gained about 10 or 12 pounds in eating the local cuisine. Still trying to work that off, But he gained about 30, 40 pounds, so he
I
did.
heard, yeah. Did some De Niro stuff for it.
Yeah.
Can you talk just a bit more about what the collaboration between you and Peter Farrelly was like?
Pete is great. I mean, Pete is always someone who, at the beginning, even on the set, he'll tell everybody, look, I want input from everybody. Don't feel like you can't come up to me. If you have an idea, come up and tell me, because I don't have to take it. But if it's a great idea, maybe it's going to change the movie. So he's always open about, getting input. And so that's why I like working with him. It's just so much fun. And he's just so funny. Just listening to stories, we would talk about stories in the cutting room to kind of, in between working, and I would just laugh and laugh. And it was just such a great experience to work on a film with him.
Well, the movie has won audience awards at several film festivals, including at Toronto. Why do you think people have such a strong reaction to the film when they see it?
I think that what Pete accomplished in this was something that gives you a hint of the time and this relationship and the struggles, but does it in a way that doesn't make you feel bogged down or held down by it. You don't feel like this movie's preaching to you. It's just showing one story in this time in the South, in the Jim Crow era. And so in doing it in a humorous way, you just wind up having this really these feel-good moments that you almost feel guilty for at times, because they're in between the feel-good moments are these heartbreaking moments. And it's something about that connects with things happening today that I think make it resonate with an audience. That's really the best I can say it, I think.
Patrick, thank you so much. Congratulations on the movie. It was a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a good one.